I really love model trains. I think I love model trains slightly more than I love building model planes. I actually wanted this to be a model railway channel back when I started it in 2016, but I didn't have any space or time then, so I started building other kits, and that's kind of the direction this one's taken. A little while ago I did build a 00 gauge garden railway, but I've not had time for that one. I did start a 4 foot by 2 foot N gauge model railway, but didn't have time for that one either. I've also got some TT120 model trains, but again, that one's been a bit derailed by time, pun intended. But this year I thought to myself, I do actually want to do something with trains. And I do get requests for trains quite often. So I've decided that I'm going to build a micro N-gauge layout. I'm Matt, this is Model Minute, and join me in this video as I show you how I built my micro N-gauge layout. So I've set myself a little bit of a challenge with this one. I can't buy anything new. That's basically it. I've got loads of stuff from before YouTube where I have loads of model railway stuff, and the only thing I can use that is new is the little base that I've got. But everything else, all the scenic elements, have to be things which I'm going to use that already exists or were bought previously for other projects. Nothing brand new for this one. So the base that I've got is actually, I think it's like a little tray. It's a little wooden tray. I got a selection of these in an arts and crafts shop, and I've used others on dioramas as well. So I've gone for the biggest one I've got here, which is 40 centimeters long and 15 centimeters wide. So not very big at all. I've managed to dig out some track from my stash, a small set track curve and a small radius right hand set track point, and I'll fill in the rest with some odd lengths of flexi track. I marked on my little base where the join was between the curve and the points, and then using my drill bit I drilled out 2 holes. I soldered on wires to the back of the fish plates. These are going to be my electrical feeds. I then rejoined the track, added some general purpose glue to the back of it, threaded those wires through those holes that I've drilled, and positioned the track in place. This should provide a very discreet way of powering this micro layout. The rest of the track parts were then carefully added into the relevant places, connecting them to the point and gluing them down. I would make sure to cut them to length using my track cutters. And I found a couple of buffer stops in my stash, which would make the perfect additions here. I applied some weight to the track and left it a little while for the glue to really hold it down to the wooden base. And to make sure everything was working, I gave it a little test. I'm not using a point motor on this micro layout, instead I'll leave that down to the operator to operate by hand. I didn't see the point in the extra complexity. Again, pun intended. I thought it'd be fun to have a little tunnel on the end of the layout, and this could be a way of joining this into a bigger layout at some point in the future. I marked out where it was going to go, and then using some scrap pieces of cardboard, I built up the landscape which would be at that end of the layout. Old pieces of wrapping paper were scrumpled up and added into this area, and then plaster bandage, which I've cut into strips and soaked in warm water, were added to form a hard shell. And after a few applications of this, I've got the end of my layout kind of scenic. Interestingly, I've designed it at this point to be a standalone module, so I can actually do work on this separately. I'm going to ballast my tracks using this fine gravel, and this was sprinkled over the relevant areas and then moved around to look considerably better using a dry paintbrush. Once I'd got it looking more or less how I wanted it to, I used an eyedropper to apply isopropyl alcohol to the layout, which should make this suitably wet and allow a PVA and water mixture to run into all of the gravel and help glue it down. This is quite a traditional way of applying ballast to a model railway, but I did have to be careful to make sure I didn't inadvertently glue anything to the points and prevent them from freely operating later on. With that done, I dug out some various scenic elements which I have in my stash box. Some of these are all recycled from old projects, such as this little station, the buildings and the trees. I decided that I'd paint the road areas in a dark grey paint and glued down some self-adhesive paving slabs which I've cut to the relevant shape. I believe these may be from a Metcalf kit. These were applied in various areas which I thought that people may require access around this railway station. Whilst all of that is drying, I'm going to move over to my tunnel mouth. I gave the whole thing a coat of black spray paint, and then I gave it a zenithal highlight in a lighter grey. This was done from spraying from above, as if the sun is beating down, but I didn't want to use white because that's not, unless I was going for like a chalky kind of base layer, that's not where I was kind of going with this. I wanted more of a rock kind of effect, so this lighter grey should be a good base for that. And then with that done, I did some dry brushing over the top in an even lighter grey, just to bring out the stonework on the tunnel mouth. I then mixed up some brown paint with some PVA glue, and then painted this sticky mud over all of the areas I wanted grass to go. And for the grass, I used various different kinds of flock, which I've got in my stash, some slightly thicker grades and different colours to add a bit of variety. To top it all off though, I would use some static grass, which I would then tap off and save for future reuse. There were some gaps between the stonework of the tunnel mouth and the retaining walls, so for here I used some bigger clumps of foliage, simply stuck down with some PVA glue. A product I bought a little while ago is this dirtied down moss effect. This should add a further layer of visual interest to this area. Making sure to fully mix this product, it could be applied to the various areas that I thought had been perhaps neglected over time and has generated the growth of moss. It was painted onto these areas, and as it's water soluble, it can be reactivated or moved around with water if needed. I then left that to one side to fully dry. Now that my ballast is dry, I'm going to do a bit of weathering on this as well. It's not quite the colour I want it to be, especially given that this is the end of a railway line and it may not be the most well maintained, especially with locomotives standing here for various periods of time. I airbrushed on some various different colours of brown, building up the layers in different areas. After this, I would add some darker shades, mixed in with some black, but primarily down the centre of the areas that I thought locomotives and rolling stock would be standing at for prolonged periods. I also used some black paint airbrushed onto the tunnel mouth to simulate the sort of smoke staining effect that happens at tunnel mouths after a steam engine has travelled through it. I wasn't 100% happy with just having a dark black tunnel, so I actually decided I would line the inside of the tunnel with some brick paper. This is something I've probably had in my stash for over 20 years. I'm not even entirely sure where it came from, but it was glued into place. Between the two running lines, I decided to add some more of my PVA and brown mud mix and sprinkled in some sand. This would then be painted in a more appropriate earth kind of colour, which I'm hoping would give a more of a barren soil kind of impression. I wouldn't leave it completely barren though, and instead added some little bits of foliage in places here and there, with a little bit of grass also being added. And once again, I made sure to remove the excess. This layout is a little bit large now, so I'm actually going to hoover the excess away. I'm now ready to glue down my tunnel section, so some general purpose glue was applied and then it was pushed into place. Some extra ballast would be used to hide the join between the tunnel mouth segment and the rest of the layout. And finally, the little areas which I've been holding off adding scenery to could have some more of this PVA mud mix applied, I glued in place this rather large tree, and then applied flock and scatter in the same manner as I've been doing throughout this build. And once again, when that was done, carefully removing the excess. For this section here, I thought I'd want a field with some cows in, so to define the edge of the field, I used this flexible hedge type material. And for the other edge of the field, I drilled some holes and then glued into these holes some of this flexible fencing. I'd also drill some more holes on the tunnel section and glue in some trees, which I've had for many years. They're not the best looking trees in my opinion, but I think they'll do, especially to use them up and get them out of the storage box. I managed to find a signal in my stash box as well, and this was added onto the layout in the same manner. I'm not entirely sure if this is the right place it would go, but I'm quite happy with how it looks here. I also thought that the railway would probably have some sort of communication line alongside of it, so added into place some telegraph poles. I could then start adding the other scenic elements, like these two pre-painted huts, a weighbridge and its office, and you can see I've suitably weathered with a little airbrushing the weighbridge and the road, and that little station which I built many years ago for another project. I added some cars, which I actually painted using rattle cans because they looked a little bit tatty in their bare plastic, and other scenic elements like this bike rider and signposts, these sacks on a pallet and some workmen, and even some cows in the field. I would go back over the layout and add a little bit of extra weathering using some dark browns and kind of black colours using my airbrush, just in areas that I thought needed a little bit more of it, such as on the fence posts and the tunnel mouth, and around the track work. When that was done, I used some isopropyl alcohol soaked into a cotton bud to remove any paint or residue which was on the top of the rail surfaces. If I don't clean the track, I won't be able to run my trains. The final step was to paint the entire edge of this micro layout with some black paint, and I'm calling this project done. I'm actually really happy with how this one has turned out. I haven't built a moderately sized diorama in a while, and I feel like this has helped me in some way achieve that this year. Not only that, but it's managed to get lots of different elements from my stash box out and actually being purposed in some way. Not to mention, it does also seem to be working relatively well. My locomotives are a little bit old and they definitely need a little bit of maintenance, but I'm sure with a little bit of fiddling I could get some really nice smooth operation here. It's almost a shunting puzzle layout. I think that if I had a little bit more space I could have thrown another set of points in there and then had it as one of those Inglenook siding shunting puzzle layouts. Sadly, as it's only got 2 tracks, the shunting possibilities are a little bit limited, but I wonder if at some point in the future this could be integrated into a larger layout as a standalone small branch line perhaps. I think I'd like to explore some more little projects like this in the future, perhaps use up some more of the other things I've got in my model railway stash. At least until I manage to get back out into the garden and mess around with that double O gauge layout, and maybe resurrect the 4x2 N gauge layout which I've got in my garage, but that one's been neglected for a while now, so would probably need overhauling in some way. Not to mention of course the TT120 stuff, which is currently still sitting in its box in the attic. I think I'd love to have like a shelf layout running around this room, but sadly this room is so small and with my other modelling supplies there isn't really the space for it. But in the future, who knows. For now though, I think I'm going to have to stick to micro layouts if I am going to build anything which is model railway related. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of my build of this micro N-gauge layout, and if you've got any suggestions for other things you'd like to see me build. Massive thanks to my Model Club members for the extra support they give the channel. And if you'd like to join the people on screen, make sure you check out the links in the description to find out what becoming a Model Club member means and the perks that you get. There are other ways to help support the channel if you'd like to do so, and again, full details are underneath the video. The best way to support this channel for free though is by subscribing with notifications turned on so you never miss a modelling upload. The last thing to say though is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time. Micro N-gauge layout. There we go. Why do people have such loud motorbikes? I've got one more of those wooden baseboard things, but it's smaller. So I wonder if I could do something with that. I'll have to have a think. Micro layout part 3.